Savai pumsam paro dharmo yato bhaktir adhokshaje ahaituki apratihata yatatma suprasidati. In response to the question posed by the sages of Naimisharanya as to what is one's supreme dharma, the illustrious Shuka Brahma gives a very simple, short, and profound answer. Savai pumsam paro dharmo yato bhakti radhokshaje ahaituki apratihata yatatma suprasidati. One's supreme dharma is bhakti. One's dharma is to love one's creator, to be in love with him throughout one's life. Unconditional, unswerving, unflinching, undivided love. Loving devotional service, upasana, bhakti, is one's supreme dharma. This is what Krishna conveys towards the end of 12th chapter. With 12 chapters of the Gita, Krishna completes his teachings. Swadharma jnana vairagya sadhya bhaktyeka gocharaha narayana parambrahma gita shastre samiritaha. The essence of Gita Shastra is discovery of the Supreme Brahman, the Parabrahman, Narayana, through the means of bhakti, which can be cultivated through the practice of one's Swadharma, Karma Yoga, Jnana, Vairagya. Jnana karmatmike nishke yoga lakshesu samskrite atmanubhuti siddhyarte purva shatkena chodite. In the first 6 chapters of the Gita, Krishna takes up the theme of Atma Sakshatkara, which can be realized through the practice of Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. He also in the process covers the 2 tattvas, the Achit Tattva and the Chit Tattva. Madhyame Bhagavad Tattva Yatatmya Vapti Siddhaye Jnana Karma Bhinirvatyoho Bhakti Yoga Prakirtitaha. In the second excerpt, the second group of 6 chapters of the Gita, the theme of Paramatma Sakshatkara is taken up. And Krishna explains Bhakti Yoga, which can be brought about through the practice of Karma Yoga and Jnana with Vairagya. So with 12 chapters, Krishna completes his teachings. However, he reserves 6 more chapters, the third excerpt, primarily to summarize the concepts that were taken up, that were the subject of the first 12 chapters. And he also takes the opportunity to re-clarify the nature of the 3 tattvas, Achit Tattva, the insentient principle of matter, Chit Tattva, the sentient individual souls, Bhagavad Tattva. And he also clarifies, he also concludes with total clarity on Tattva Hita Purushartha. So from 13th chapter onwards, Krishna begins to summarize all the concepts of the first 12 chapters. Interestingly, right at the beginning of the 13th chapter, Arjuna has a question. Prakritim Purusham Chaiva Kshetrajnamevacha Edad Veditumichami Jnanam Nyeyam Cha Keshava. Now this could be taken as an explicit question or an implicit question. This is Arjuna's 15th question. Why do I say that it can be taken either as explicit or implicit? In some texts, we do not find this question of Arjuna. The 13th chapter straight away starts with Bhagavan's exposition. We don't find Arjuna's explicit question. In some texts, we do find this question. In the commentaries of Swami Ramanuja and Adi Shankara, we don't find this explicit question of Arjuna taken up for commentary. But in some other commentaries, we do find this question taken up specifically and commented upon. It doesn't matter whether it is implicit or explicit, nevertheless, there is a question here. And that is the reason why Krishna also uses that opportunity to take up further exposition on summarizing certain key principles, which happens to be the beginning of the 13th chapter. Now, what is the context for Arjuna's 15th question? When Arjuna implicitly or explicitly asks this question, Prakritim Purusham Chaiva Kshetrajnamevacha Edad Veditumichami Jnanam Nyeyam Cha Keshava. Arjuna wants clarity on certain key principles taught before. Prakriti, Purusha, Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Jnana, Nyeyam. What is the context? Why such a question should arise? The concluding part of 12th chapter presents the profound message of Krishna. Krishna concludes the 12th chapter with a very profound message. Yetu dharmyamritamidam yatoktam paryupasate Shraddadhana matparamaha bhaktaste ativa me priyaha. What a glorious declaration. Krishna, in the process of his exposition on his bhakta, he keeps talking about the characteristics of his bhakta. And eventually he concludes the 12th chapter by saying, the one, Yetu dharmyamritamidam yatoktam paryupasate Shraddadhana matparamaha bhaktaste ativa me priyaha. Such a bhakta is exceedingly dear to me, he says. In a way, this concluding shloka of the 12th chapter can also be taken as the concluding shloka of Krishna's teachings. Because with this shloka ends Krishna's teachings. This is the last shloka of the 12th chapter. There would have been no need for further continuation because Krishna has already covered all the topics. Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. He's already covered the topics of Tattvahita Purushartha. He's already covered the topics of Tattvatraya. So therefore, there would have been no need for him to continue. That is possibly why Krishna makes a very conclusive statement towards the end of 12th chapter. Bhaktaste ativa me priyaha. He says, hey Arjuna, let me tell you, it is very important that one should love Krishna, but it is more important that Krishna should love one. It is very important for us to strive not just to love Krishna, but to strive to be loved by Krishna. And here Krishna says, Bhaktaste ativa me priyaha. Such a bhakta is exceedingly dear to me. We all would want to be in that position of that bhakta, to be exceedingly dear to our Krishna. Who is that bhakta who is exceedingly dear to Krishna? Whosoever, yetu dharmyamritam idam dharmyamritam. Krishna says, dharmyamritam, amritam, amrita, dharma, which is amrita. Savai pumsam paro dharmo yato bhaktir adhokshaje. Ahaituki apratihata yatatma prasidati. The essence of Bhagavata conveyed by Shukha is being summarized here by Krishna. Dharmya amritam, he says. Amrita, the path of bhakti yoga. Bhakti is one's dharma. It is nectarine. That path is a nectarine path. Dharmyamrita leads to amrita, leads to immortality. It is nectarine and it also leads to immortality of moksha. Rajavidya rajaguhyam pavitramidam uttamam pratyakshaavagamam susukham kartum avyayam. Explaining bhakti, Krishna talks about how bhakti is susukha. Therefore, yetu dharmyamritam idam. This dharmyamritam, this pathway of bhakti yoga, yatoktam paryupasate, yatoktam, explained to me. Not only in this 12th chapter, this shloka is the concluding shloka of the 12th chapter, but this can also be concluding shloka for all the 12 chapters put together. Because yetu dharmyamritam bhakti yoga, which can be brought about through the practice of karma yoga and jnana yoga, which were detailed in the first 11 chapters. Through the acquisition of jnana, knowledge of the three realities, tattvatraya jnana, bhokta bhogyam preritaram chamatva dushtastatastena amritattvameti, the Upanishad declares. Bhokta bhogyam preritaram, chit, achit, Ishvara, the three tattvas, which together constitute the ultimate reality, the triad of realities. Yetu dharmyamritam idam yatoktam paryupasate. The one who follows this path of bhakti yoga, which is amrita like, with shraddha, shraddadhana mat paramaha. Shraddadhana mat paramaha, with endowed with supreme shraddha, with only one goal, with Krishna as the goal of all endeavors. Bhaktaste ativa me priyaha. Krishna says, such a bhakta is exceedingly dear to me, hey Arjuna. He is exceedingly dear to me. Now, Arjuna has got the message. If Arjuna has been till now thinking that Krishna loves him the most, Arjuna has to reconsider that. Because Krishna has now clearly said who is exceedingly dear to him. So, like all of us, Arjuna possibly also would have started reflecting on whether he qualifies to be exceedingly dear to Krishna. So Arjuna definitely wants to be exceedingly dear to Krishna. And therefore, Arjuna also now knows how he can become exceedingly dear to Krishna by walking on the pathway that was revealed by Krishna throughout the 12 chapters of the Gita. The one who walks on the path that Krishna has revealed in the 12 chapters of the Gita, with Shraddha, one would become exceedingly dear to Krishna. Now, to walk on this path revealed by Krishna, obviously, one needs to practice one's Swadharma. One needs jnana of the Tattvatraya. One needs to develop Vairagya. Now, Arjuna immediately, possibly, started reflecting on how much he has already assimilated Krishna has spent 12 chapters giving him loads of jnana. Like a good student, Arjuna possibly started reflecting on how much he has already assimilated. And possibly Arjuna concludes that he still needs to know more. He has a lot more clarifications that need to happen. And Arjuna also is still not clear, because he also realizes that as long as one is physically embodied, as long as the Atman is physically embodied, one is materially attached. As long as we are physically embodied, we are materially attached. Therefore, we cannot avoid being materially conscious. We cannot avoid it. After all, when I say I stands for the composite entity, the two things coming together, Purusha and Prakriti. There is a material side to me, there is a spiritual side to me. And as long as I, the Atman, is embodied, I cannot avoid being materially attached. Then, how can one find a way to the spiritual through the material? How can I find my way to the spiritual through the material? Using the material world, using the material world as my resource, how do I attain my source? This is definitely a question that needs clarity. Krishna did cover this in detail. The whole of 10th chapter was devoted in a way to answer this question. But still, Arjuna wanted more clarity. He also wanted more clarity on the nature of the three realities as well. And that is what brings Arjuna to raise this question. So therefore, Arjuna, in order to get more clarity, asks, hey Krishna, I would like clarity on these 6 topics that you have already covered: Prakriti, Purusha, Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Jnana, Jnaya. In a way, Krishna possibly was wanting this kind of a question, whether it is implicit or explicit, but this gives an opportunity to Krishna to summarize his teachings. Because an ideal teacher always would structure his teachings into 3 parts: a glorious introduction, a detailed exposition, and an equally glorious conclusion. And the conclusion would involve summarizing what has already been taught. So Krishna takes this opportunity. So Arjuna's question, 15th question to Krishna, is to provide, seeking clarification, more clarity. Prakritim purusham chaiva kshetram kshetrajnameva cha edad veditum ichchami jnanam jneyam cha Keshava. So thus Krishna takes up, thus Gita continues further. And in the 13th chapter, Krishna takes up summarizing and re-clarifying 2 of the 3 key tattvas. The Achit Tattva and the Chit Tattva are taken up for discussion in detail, re-clarifying the nature of these 2 tattvas. So in response to Arjuna's 15th question, Krishna responds, Idam shariram kaunteya kshetramidya vidhiyate Edadyod vetitam prahu Edadyo vetitam prahu kshetrajya tatvidaha. Krishna immediately gives the answer. This, the very first shloka, summarizes the Viveka Jnana that is required to know the difference and distinction between the 2 tattvas of Chit and Achit, Kshetra and Kshetrajna. Idam shariram kaunteya. Hey kaunteya, idam shariram. This sharira, this deha, this physical body, idam shariram kaunteya, kshetramid yabidhiyate, is known as kshetra. Etadyo vettitam pravuhu, kshetragya iti tadvidaha. The knower of this kshetra is kshetragya, he says. Kshetragyam chapimam vitti sarva kshetreshu bharata. Kshetragnyayo jnanam yatya jnanam matam mama. Now, Krishna defines what is kshetra, what is kshetragya. Kshetra is the physical body, he says. The Sharira is known as Kshetra. Why? Because it is a distinct field. It is a distinct field for experiencing. It is a distinct field used by the Atman to experience pains and pleasures. That is why it is Kshetra. It's a distinct field. This Kshetra is made up of Prakriti, which is material nature, which consists of 24 building blocks, 24 tattvas. The Purusha, the Atman, which is also called Purusha, Purisete iti Purushaha. Why is the Atman called Purusha? Purisete iti Purushaha. Purisete. Puri is a town, is a city. The body is like a city. The indweller of the city called body is Purusha. The one who indwells. The Purusha, the indweller. Now this Purusha cannot control the entire material nature. His area of influence is limited. He at best can influence a small part of this material nature. Prakriti is this entire material nature. The world of matter is Prakriti. And a small part of it comes under the influence of one Purusha. Now, this area of influence of a Purusha is Kshetra, the area of jurisdiction. The Purusha, the indweller of the Kshetra, is Kshetragya. Kshetra is once the Atman's area of influence. The Atman, the Purusha, cannot control the entire material nature. He at best has limited influence on one particular area, which is the physical body, which is the Kshetra. It is the distinct field allocated to the Atman for the sake of experiencing its own karma phala. So Kshetra is the field of experience. It is the physical body provided to the Atman to experience its karma phala, to exhaust its karma phala. Kshetrajna is the knower of the Kshetra. The indwelling Atman, the indwelling Purusha in the Kshetra, the physical body, is the Kshetrajna. Now, the Atman is supposed to be Kshetrajna. Why do I say that? Supposed to be knower of the Kshetra. But in samsara, the Atman many a times fails to be a Kshetrajna. May not end up knowing its own Kshetra, knowing the distinction between itself and the body. Ideally, the Atman indwelling in the Kshetra is supposed to be a Kshetrajna. The knower of the Kshetra is Kshetrajna. So immediately, Krishna adds, Kshetrajnam chapimam viddhi sarva kshetreshu bharata. Kshetrajnam cha api mam viddhi. Cha means and. Api means also. In the same statement, Krishna uses and also, which means he's conveying two important things within that statement. Typically, we don't find within one sentence and also. So here we find and also. Kshetragyam cha api mam vidhi, mam, mine. So, hey Arjuna, I am also a kshetragya. Krishna says, Kshetragyam cha vidhi mam. Know me also, know me as kshetragya. And the Atman, the Jivatma, the indweller in the kshetra as kshetragya, and know me as kshetragya, but sarva kshetreshu bharata, I say. Sarva kshetreshu. While the Jivatma is a kshetragya of one kshetra, the Atman, which is indwelling in a body, is a knower of that body, can have influence on that body. Its area of influence, its area of jurisdiction is only that body, that kshetra. Bhagavan is also kshetragya, but his area of influence is sarva kshetreshu. This entire universe, sarva kshetreshu. All the kshetras come under his jurisdiction. He has influence, he controls every kshetra that is created. And kshetragya cha api also. What is the need for also? Know me as kshetragya, who is the knower of all kshetras. Also, hey Arjuna, know me as the knower of all the knowers. Krishna is not only the knower of all the kshetras, he is also the knower of all the kshetragyas. That is why the Upanishads declare, Bhokta Bhogyam Preritaram Chamatva Chit Achit Ishvara. Ishvara controls and rules the other two tattvas. The other two tattvas, Chit Tattva and Achit Tattva, Purusha and Prakriti, belong to Bhagavan. That is why Krishna says, Kshetragyam chapimam vidhi sarva kshetreshu bharata. Kshetragnyayo jnanam yatta jnanam matam mama. Jnana, true knowledge, is to know the kshetra and the kshetragya. When he says kshetragya, he also is referring to the kshetragya of all the kshetragyas and of all the kshetras. Who is the Sarvagya Sarvavit? Krishna is Sarvagya and Sarvavit. Therefore, Jnana is to know the kshetra, kshetragya and the Sarvagya. Everything else is Ajnana. Any subject that does not deal with these three truths is useless, Krishna says. Kshetragyam chapimam vitti sarva kshetreshu bharata. Kshetragyayo jnanam yatta jnanam matam mama. Krishna thus takes the opportunity. He takes the opportunity in the 13th chapter to dwell in detail on the Achittat, the nature of Achittatva, Prakriti, the nature of Chittatva, Purusha, and also establishes the distinct and different natures of these two tattvas. The 13th chapter is quite a complex chapter, as we have seen before. It's highly metaphysical. The content is very profound, very analytical. But right at the heart of the 13th chapter, we find a very practical framework. Krishna takes the opportunity of answering Arjuna's question. And in that process, he also gives a very practical, useful framework. Now, in the context of detailing Prakriti and Purusha, Krishna says, Prakritim Purusham Chaiva Vidyanadi Ubhavapi Vikaramscha Gunamschaiva Vidhi Prakriti Sambhavan. Hey Arjuna, Prakritim Purusham Chaiva, Prakriti and Purusha, Vitti Anadi Upavapi. Both Prakriti and Purusha are Anadi, he says, are eternal. Both Purusha and Prakriti, the individual souls and the world of matter are eternal. And their association is also eternal. Hey Arjuna, not only Prakriti and Purusha are eternal, the association between Prakriti and Purusha are also eternal, Anadi. There is no beginning to the association of the Atman with Prakriti. The association of a Kshetrajna with Kshetra. This association is Anadi. Adi is beginning, Anadi, no beginning. Luckily, there is an Anta to this association, thankfully. There is definitely a way, an exit out of the cycle of samsara. So Krishna says, Vikaramscha gunamschaiva vidhi prakriti sambhavan. Vikaramscha gunamschaiva vidhi prakriti sambhavan. This association results, there are two outcomes to this association. There are two possibilities. Vikara, gunams. What are vikaras? What are gunas? Vikaramscha gunamschaiva vidhi prakriti sambhavan. Prakriti sambhavan. The Atman, when it is associated with Prakriti, because of this association with Prakriti, there are two things that are possible, Krishna says. Vikaramscha, vikara, parinama, modifications. Ichcha, dvesha, sukham, dukkham, sanghatas, chetanadritihi. Sanghatas, chetanadritihi. Chetana adritihi. Chetana, the Atman, the Chittatva, the Atman, the Purusha, which is embodied, is actually traveling in a vehicle. This embodiment is like a vehicle. Adritihi. Beautiful word Krishna uses. It's a vehicle. The samsaric journey is a journey of the Atman in a vehicle. The vehicle which is made up of Prakriti, which is the Kshetra. Ichcha, dvesha, sukha, dukkha, sanghatas, chetanadritihi. Because of this association, when the Atman, when it comes in contact with Prakriti, when it gets associated with Prakriti, which means when it is embodied, when it indwells in a physical body made up of Prakriti, it results in parinama, transformation, modifications. The body is always subject to change all the time. So therefore, the experiences of the Atman, as long as it is embodied, the experiences are subject to modifications all the time. Eternal happiness is not possible for the Atman as long as it is embodied. The Atman is subject to afflictions of all kinds because it is embodied. So therefore, there cannot be constant experiences. The experiences keep fluctuating. Ichcha, dvesha, sukham, dukkham. The likes and dislikes, pains and pleasures. These are the transformations. Parinama. Sanghatas chetanadritihi. Sanghata. The kshetra is a sanghata. The body, the physical body that the Atman is bestowed with is nothing but a sanghata. Sanghata is a compound. It's a compound of various building blocks. Prakriti has 24 building blocks. The Achittattva has various building blocks. And therefore, this body is made up of these building blocks. Mahabhutanya buddhiravyaktamevacha indriyani dasainkamcha panchachendriya gocharaha. Krishna talks about the composition of this body. It is a sanghata, it's a compound, it's a mixture, admixture of several physical elements, all put together. And this sanghata is a adritihi, is a vehicle to the chetana. To the chetana, the jivatma, the indweller of this body, this Sanghata is a vehicle. And because of this association with this physical body, the Atman undergoes different kinds of experiences. The experiences vary. Ichha, dvesha, sukham, dukkham, sanghatas, chetana, triti. That is why Krishna says, vikaramscha. Prakritim purusham chaiva, vidhi anadubhavapi, vikaramscha gunamschaiva, vidhi prakriti sambhava. Vidhi, hey Arjuna, no, the vikaras are because of prakriti sambhava. The vikaras are caused by prakriti. It is not the Atman undergoing different kinds of experiences, because the nature of the Atman is not to undergo different kinds of experiences. The original nature of the Atman is to be in a state of bliss all the time. But the alternating, the varying experiences are because of its association with Prakriti. So therefore, the purpose of the body is to experience pains and pleasures, which is nothing but exhausting karma. The kshetra is given to the kshetrajna, the Atman, for the sake of experiencing its own karma phala, exhausting its own karma, be it punya karma or papa karma. And also, not only exhausting, but also to accumulate new karma as well. So one outcome, one category of the outcome of the association of the Atman with the kshetra, the Purusha with Prakriti, is vikara, modifications, parinamas, different kinds of experiences. Vikaramsta gunamschaiva. The other outcome, the other category is gunaha. Krishna says here, gunaha. Now, this guna is not to be understood as the three gunas. Gunaha. Vidhi prakriti sambhavaha. What are the gunas, qualities that Krishna is talking about here? This body, which is a product of Prakriti, is given not only to experience punya and papa exhaust one's papa karma, it is also an instrument to also achieve liberation. It is also an sanghatas chetana dhritihi. The vehicle is given not only to either accumulate or experience punya and papa, but also to exhaust and also practice sadhana to attain liberation. It is the same body. Sharira, the kshetra, is also a moksha sadhana. The same kshetra is samsara hetu. The same kshetra is also hetu for mukti. It is the same kshetra which can influence one to be in karma bandhana all the time, or it is the same kshetra which can be a vehicle, an instrument for moksha. This is where Krishna clearly clarifies on how to use the material to reach the spiritual. The resources that are available to us are all material, including this body, including the mind, and including the intellect. The Atman is given several resources. In its journey in this material world, every resource that is given to the Atman is material. But Krishna also shows a way how to use the material resources to reach the source of all these material resources. That is where Krishna talks about the jnana and the jnaya. Jnana, knowledge that needs to be acquired, cultivated. The means of knowledge, and through this means of knowledge, jnayam, the object, the goal of knowledge. Vikaramscha gunamschaiva vidhi prakriti sambhavan. Gunas here, the qualities, the various qualities, various virtues, various values that can be cultivated constitute jnana. It is using this very material body It is using this very material mind. It is using this very material intellect. Krishna gives a framework to cultivate, to practice a set of values, a set of virtues. And this set of virtues, he calls them as jnana, because they are the means of knowledge. The means of knowledge that would result in one acquiring atma-jnana. Thus, Krishna takes the opportunity to clarify, how can I use this material resource and attain my source? The way to the spiritual through the material. And in that process, right in the heart of the 13th chapter, Krishna embeds a set of shlokas consisting of 20 values, 20 virtues, and gives a very beautiful framework. A framework of values, practicing which one can go through a journey of revitalizing transformation. This segment of the Gita is so very foundational to our spiritual journey. It is so very simple, at the same time, extremely profound. And in his own characteristic style, Krishna presents these 20 virtues as a ladder to climb up. Amanitvam, adambitvam, ahimsa, kshantirarjavam, acharyopasanam, shaucham, stairyam, atma vinigraha, indriyarteshu vairagyam, anahankaramevacha, janma mrityu jara vyadi, dukkha doshanudarshanam. Asakti anabhishwangaha putradara grihashu nityam cha samachittatvam ishtanishto pavattishu maichananya yogena bhaktiravya vicharini viviktadesha sevitvam aratir jana samsadi adhyatma yoga nityatvam tattva darshanam etadjnanam iti proktam ajnanam yadatonyata. 20 values, a framework of values. There are different ways to relish these 20 values, and we have in the past discussed these values on several occasions. But we can look at these values as a ladder. And each value, each quality, each guna here as a rung. And when we look at the way Krishna presents this framework, and we look at the order in which the values are presented, we get to relish a very profound message. Krishna talks about jnana. He says jnana is nothing but practice of these 20 values. Atma jnana is a byproduct of practice of these 20 values, Krishna says. When one leads one life rooted in the practice of these 20 values. Amanitvam. He starts with the very first rung of the ladder. Now, we need to see this ladder. We need to visualize this ladder. A ladder which takes us through this climbing up of this ladder is a journey of revitalizing transformation. Now, there is one foundational rung of this ladder, which is foundational. And what is this? Acharyopasanam, upasana of the Acharya. Now, to practice this value of Acharyopasanam, which happens to be the 6th value that Krishna gives, the first 5 become prerequisites. When we look at the ladder, in a way that Krishna has structured these 20 values, we get to see the profound meaning, the message as to why the ladder has been structured the way, why Krishna followed a specific sequence of values. There is a clear methodology here that Krishna lays out. Amanitvam, adambitvam, ahimsa, shanti, arjavam. 5 rungs, 5 values to be climbed in order for Acharyopasanam, the 6th ladder. Amanitvam, humility. Any learning needs humility. There is no learning without humility. The palace of knowledge has a very low door to entry, low door for entry. One needs to necessarily bend down, bend low to enter this palace of knowledge. Humility, therefore, is the entry virtue for acquisition of knowledge. The entry virtue is humility. Amanitvam, adambitvam. Amanitvam is pridelessness. Adambitvam is also pridelessness. Amanitvam is basically not showing, not pridelessness, and also having freedom from self-importance. Adambitvam is pridelessness, freedom from hypocrisy, freedom from pretense. Both are entry virtues. Without practice of these virtues, there cannot be any progress on the pathway of acquiring knowledge. Amanitvam, adambitvam, ahimsa. Now, ahimsa here needs to be understood differently in the context of this ladder. Ahimsa is non-violence. But here ahimsa generally is non-violence towards others. Here ahimsa is non-violence towards oneself. Continuing to stay in samsara is himsa. Continuing to be immersed in worldliness is not seeking recovery. It is like a patient refusing to take curative medicines. A patient only taking painkillers. One in samsara, immersed in worldliness, by fulfilling material desires, is only taking painkillers. But only when one starts to fulfill one's spiritual desires, it's like taking curative medicines. No, as long as one does not seek recovery from samsara, one is causing harm to oneself. So here, himsa is the Atman causing harm to itself. So ahimsa, not causing harm to oneself, which is seeking recovery, seeking medicines for spiritual upliftment. Ahimsa, kshanti, acceptance, glad acceptance, as seeing life as a training school. Patience. Without patience, one would become a patient. Patience in the journey spiritual journey is so very important. Many a times we lack this. One would always want quick results. A caterpillar has to struggle a lot in the cocoon before it can transform into a butterfly. Shanti is so very critical in one's spiritual journey. Ahimsa, Shanti, Arjavam. Arjavam. Arjavam is simplicity, truthfulness, thought, word, and deed being aligned. Thought, word, and deed. So if the thought is pursuit of truth, then the word and the deed also has to be aligned. That is why Krishna says, Tadviddhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. Pariprashnena sevaya. That in order to seek truth, Krishna says, one must approach a tattvavid, a master, and then surrender to him. That is where the sixth rung of Acharyopasanam comes in. These 5 rungs leads one to practice beautifully the virtue of Acharyopasanam, worship of the Acharya, upasana of the Acharya, surrender to the Acharya. Amanitvam, adambitvam, ahimsa, kshantir, arjavam. Through the practice of these 5 entry virtues, one then qualifies to practice the virtue of Acharyopasanam. When one practices this virtue of Acharyopasanam, the rest of the rungs become effortless. Acharyopasanam leads to Shaucham. Purity. Purity, if one is not pure, one remains poor. A millionaire will continue to be poor if he is fixated on a billionaire. Therefore, purity is a prerequisite for contentment. If there is no purity of the mind, if the greed, if the jealousy, if the envy in the mind, the impurities are not cleansed, there cannot be contentment. And therefore, all the rituals that are prescribed by the Shastras, all the sadhanas, are all meant primarily for this purification of the mind. Acharyopasanam, shaucham, stairyam, steadfastness, perseverance, firmness. Once on this path, in serving the Acharya, steadfastness comes naturally because one realizes there are no quick fixes. We cannot make our relationship with Krishna conditional to him fixing our problems. Very important. We cannot make our relationship with Krishna conditional to him fixing our problems. Instead of asking Krishna to fix our problems, we must seek Krishna to fix us so that we can fix our problems. We can fix some problems, but we should not be fixated with problems that cannot be fixed. We need to know the difference. There are problems that can be fixed. There are problems that cannot be fixed. One needs to remain steadfast. Acharyopasanam, shaucham, stairyam, atma vinigraha. Atma vinigraha is self-control. This is exercising choice-making, conscious choice-making. Making the right choices all the time. Atma vinigraha. Indriyarteshu vairagyam. Vairagya is dispassion towards indriyarteshu vairagyam. Dispassion towards worldly allurements. It is not suppression. It is not suppression of desires. Suppression can only lead to depression. Vairagya is not suppression. Vairagya is about transcending. It's about transcending the desires by giving the desires right direction. Indriyarteshu vairagya. Anahankara mevacha. Anahankara. Anahankara is the practice, a virtue of practicing the awareness of I am not the body. Ahankara is egotism. Anahankara, freedom from egotism. This is rooted in the awareness of I am not the body. This journey of realization that I am not the body has to begin with the understanding that I am more than my body. That is easy to understand. I am not the body. That realization is difficult, but we can begin the journey with an understanding that I am much more than the body, which means not being consumed all the time by our own bodily needs and drives. Devoting some time to our spiritual side as well, to our spiritual needs. Anahankara vemacha. Janma mrityu jara vyadi dukkha dosha anudarshanam. This is realizing the fragility of life without becoming fragile. Janma mrityu jara vyadi. Janma, mrityu, jara, vyadi. Dukkha dosha anudarshanam. Life is meant to be fragile. And realizing this, the fragility of life without becoming fragile, is so very important. It is to start seeking the invisible beyond the visible. Knowing that changes are inevitable in life. And seeking beyond the perceptible changes, seeking the invisible truth beyond the perceptible changes, which is what we are subject to in life all the time. Janma mrityu jara vyadi dukkha dosha anudarshanam. Asaktihi anabhishvanga. Asaktihi. lack of freedom from possessory attitude. Everything belongs to Krishna. I am only a trustee. Even this body belongs to him. That's the practice of this virtue is asakti. Asakti. Anabhishvangaha putra dara grihadishu. Freedom from excessive attachment. Putra dara grihadishu. Children, spouse, house, etc. and the like. Krishna is not saying here relationships are not important. Relationships are very important. But relationships are meant to take us closer to Krishna and not to drag us away from him. Anabhishvanga putra dhara grihadishu. It is essentially a virtue that is to be practiced in every relationship. One must realize that eventually that relationship is a pointer to our relationship with Krishna. Every relationship should serve the purpose of strengthening our relationship with Krishna. Anabhishvangaha putra dara grihadishu. Nityam cha samachittatvam ishtanishto papattishu. Nityam cha samachittatvam ishtanishto papattishu. Equanimity amidst all kinds of events, favorable, unfavorable. Mahichananya yogena bhakti ravya bhicharini. Mahichananya yogena bhakti ravya bhicharini. No. The spiritual journey is not a journey without any emotions. Being spiritual does not mean being completely unemotional. Emotions are very much part and parcel of our lives. Krishna here is saying this value is this virtue, this rung of this ladder is all about purifying, sanctifying, and amplifying our emotions. Sanctifying our emotions by redirecting our emotions towards Krishna, every emotion gets sanctified. By connecting with Krishna, by connecting every emotion with Krishna, every material emotion gets purified. And when we stay connected with him, our original emotion, our true emotion, love for him, of bhakti, gets amplified. When our emotions are sanctified, purified, and amplified, the pathway is beautified that leads to us towards the goal of attaining him. Therefore, Mahichananya yogena bhakti ravya vicharini. Vivikta desha sevitvam aratihi jana samsadi. Vivikta desha sevitvam. Solitude. Vivikta desha sevitvam aratihi jana samsadi. Not craving for any social interactions. Vivikta desha sevitvam. Solitude. Aloneness, not loneliness. Solitude is taking appointment with our own self. Solitude is avoiding. It is not about just isolation. It is essentially one can be amidst all action, but one is able to connect with one's own self. Loneliness is like being isolated with one's worst enemy. Isolated with one's mind very active and mind completely in a state of disturbed mind. That is loneliness. Because when one is lonely, the mind is very active and it can be very uncomfortable state. That is why many feel very uncomfortable being lonely. Loneliness is being isolated with the worst enemy. Solitude is being isolated with one's friend. The same mind, when it is mastered, when it is at peace, becomes one's friend. Vivikta desha sevitvam aratihi jana samsadi. Freedom from craving for social interaction. Social interaction today is both physical interaction and virtual interaction as well. Not only freedom craving for So physical interactions, even virtual interactions, craving to attend to a message, craving to browse through the web, craving through visiting various sites on the on the internet. So therefore, here Krishna, he's talking about one progressing to a state of solitude, which is being isolated with one's best friend, and eventually the state of bhakti, which is being isolated with one's supreme friend, Krishna. Loneliness, solitude, and bhakti. That is why in this shloka, Maicharanya yogena bhaktiravyapicharini vivikta desha sevitvam aratihi jana samsadi. Three rungs of the ladder, which essentially talks about practicing the virtue of staying connected with him wherever we are. Adhyatma yoga nityatvam tattva jnanartha darshanam. Adhyatma yoga nityatvam. Essentially, adhyatma jnana nityatvam. Adhyatma jnana. This is as we constantly learn, as our knowledge grows, it is very important that with the new learning, we also need to start seeing the world with the eyes of knowledge. Otherwise, the knowledge that is gained, if it is not put to use, that knowledge will not be strengthened. That knowledge will not grow. The more we acquire, we need to put the knowledge that is acquired to use. Adhyatma jnana nityatvam. Constantly, as we learn, we need to refine our seeing and reform our understanding. Tattva jnanartha darshanam. Comprehending the ultimate goal, tattva jnana. From being unconscious compulsive thinkers, we need to practice this virtue of consciously contemplating, thinking about the reality of life, and be rooted in tattva jnana, the knowledge of the tattvas, the ultimate reality. The 20 rungs of the ladder, Krishna beautifully presents one after the other, the one leading to the other. Amanitvam, adambitvam, ahimsa, kshantir, arjavam, all leading to the practice of the virtue of acharyopasanam. Then from then on, acharyopasanam shaucham, acharyopasanam sthairyam, acharyopasanam atmanik vinigraha, acharyopasanam indriyarteshu vairagyam, acharyopasanam asaktihi, acharyopasanam anabhishwangaha putradara grihadishu, acharyopasanam nityam cha samachitvatvam ishtanishto prapattishu. So every virtue becomes effortless with the practice of the sixth rung of the ladder. So therefore, Krishna presents a ladder of 20 rungs. Then he concludes the 13th chapter with a summary shloka which says, Kshetra kshetragyayo jnanam, kshetra antaram jnana chakshusha, he says. One should know the distinction, the antara, with this jnana chakshusha. One develops with the practice, bhuta prakriti moksham cha, bhuta prakriti moksham. The liberation from prakriti is possible through the practice of these 20 values. Using the material resources, one practices these 20 values and one finds a way to the spiritual through the material. Bhuta prakriti moksham cha. Therefore, Krishna says, this one who discriminates, who develops the discriminatory knowledge and is able to find the kshetra as distinct and different from the kshetrajna, he qualifies to attain Atma Sakshatkara, and through that qualification, he qualifies to take on the path of bhakti to reach the state of Paramatma Sakshatkara. He continues on the exposition on these two tattvas of Chit and Achit in the 14th chapter as well. And in the 15th chapter, he takes up this exposition on the third tattva, the Bhagavad Tattva, in the Purushottama Yoga. Thus we see Krishna through 13, 14, and 15 chapters, he takes the opportunity to answer Arjuna's question. Arjuna seeking clarification on Purusha, Prakriti, Kshetra, Kshetrajna, Jnana, and Nyeya. And Krishna takes the opportunity to summarize the key principles taught till the 12 chapters and also clarify on Tattva, Hita, and Purushartha. Let us continue to contemplate on these 20 values, the values, the ladder of 20 rungs, which gives us a framework which can be practiced in our day-to-day lives, which is the means to knowledge, which is the means to attain Atma Jnana that qualifies us to realize the Paramatma. Sarvam Sri Krishna Arpanamastu.